Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and apparently Kyrie Irving has said that he believes that the earth is flat, that he's convinced of it, and this has been all over sports news. But this is actually a bigger topic in other ways than just the absurdity of what he's stating. So let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. Because this has deeper implications when it comes to listening to athletes, when it comes to their scientific opinions or social opinions or anything else. What people need to understand is that athletes are just that. They're athletes. That's what they specialize in. That doesn't mean automatically that their opinions on anything besides their particular sport are particularly relevant. In some cases they might be, in other cases they're not. That has to be looked at a case-by-case basis, because there are athletes out there who are legitimate experts in other fields. There are athletes out there who have graduate degrees in other areas. There are athletes out there who have done other things outside of athletics, so they might actually be very skilled or knowledgeable in something else, but many of them are not. You've got to look at that individually, and it's interesting because this particular thing has spawned quite a bit of controversy and people trying to say that he's making bigger statements. Like at least one head coach has said, well, what I believe he's trying to say is that he's trying to talk about fake news in general. And, I kind of get that from a certain perspective because there is a lot of fake news and there is a lot of misinformation out there. And not everything that we're told is true. I mean, obviously, the media and in some cases even science has been caught telling us lies. The media, politicians, of course they lie. They lie all the time. They lie every day. We know that. Anyone with common sense realizes this. And that's understandable that people would say, well, I'm careful about who I listen to because of all that. And you know what? That's pretty reasonable. If that's the opinion he has and that's his starting point, that aspect of it is pretty reasonable. But it's also interesting because some other athletes have chimed in and said, well, maybe he's right. I might be leaning in that direction. The earth might be flat. And that's the thing. The ridiculousness of it is that all available scientific evidence and everything that we have tells us that the earth can't be flat. It's totally absurd. It's totally absurd that anyone would think that the earth is flat. I mean, the amount of cover-up and lying that would have to be carried into multiple scientific fields would be mind-blowing. And furthermore, even looking at even basic astronomical models and people who've had their own telescopes and look at the heavens above us and around us have concluded that the earth was round even before we sent spaceships and satellites out there and actually confirmed it. And it has been very, very confirmed with all that stuff. But they mathematically proved this centuries ago. Astronomers figured this out and proved it before we could even get far enough out to have an outside view because of the way everything moved around us. The earth actually had to be a sphere in space with all the space around us, not a flat disc on the ground with us looking up at the sky. I mean, it wasn't hard for them to conclude this. But that you have someone in this era who's going to make a statement like that could just be a publicity thing on his part, and it could be a thing about fake news. But the fact that it's even being entertained kind of goes to show us that you have to be very careful when you start listening to, say, athletes when it comes to science. And the reason I state that is that this is prevalent in the training world, nutrition world, and everything else, that people will listen to athletes about different things that maybe they tried or that they've had to do, and that it somehow makes sense or it's good. Just because an athlete has tried something and it hasn't hurt them, it hasn't hurt their success, they continue to be a champion, is not the scientific basis for a training or nutrition protocol. And the problem is that a lot of people will listen to that instead of saying, well, maybe I should listen to their trainers, maybe I should listen to their nutritionists and maybe find out why they had them do something. Because oftentimes with elite level athletes who need to be competent in multiple disciplines, multiple performance endeavors, you can take something like a basketball player, football player, they have more than one performance element they've got to worry about. They have multiple performance elements that have to be addressed. They may not have time or even care to know the why of everything that they do. And they might have coaches who have them doing something very specific that's specific to shoring up one of their personal weaknesses that they probably wouldn't have 90% of other people ever do. And that's the thing you've got to keep in mind. And the problem is that when they have trainers or dietitians who have them do something, a lot of these athletes pass this on and not understand that maybe that was something specific, a training protocol specific to where they are. And we all understand that in the training world, the lifting world. It's generally understood that people at different experience levels need different types of programming, different types of loading parameters, different types of recovery models. And that actually holds true to other sports as well. So a lot of times what a professional athlete is doing might not be the best approach for someone who's an amateur at their exact same endeavor. It might not be the best approach. In fact, it probably isn't in many cases. But, it can also lead to other trendy things too, because what ends up happening, a lot of times top athletes do things because they're trendy, or maybe a trainer wants to do something trendy just to be different and, have their athletes or someone do something that other people aren't doing to show their knowledge or to be different. Doesn't mean it's superior. And I mean, there's lots of cases of that. Some stuff we could talk about immediately are like the Bane masks. All the Bane masks that everyone's wearing. People who are talking about these things being useful or thinking that they have any competitive advantage to having an athlete train in these, that it's going to increase their endurance, are not looking at the science. All the experts in the field of exercise science, the top physiologists, the top coaches, everyone out there in that field are saying this stuff is crazy, it's bullshit, it's stupid, that it's not helpful at all, that it can be slightly harmful to developing endurance. And the science is pretty well settled on that. There's not even a scientific method by which, or understood protocol by which these masks could actually improve performance. Right? And people will try to argue, well, it could do this. No, it doesn't. It doesn't. They do not have any benefits, and there is no scientifically valid even proposed benefit for these. The whole concept of how they would work is just complete junk pseudoscience made up to sell a product. None of it's actually based in reality. None of it's based in reality, but because some top athletes have used these things, some people think they're great, and it's been a marketing tool, and people are buying $80 masks that might actually slightly hurt their performance in the long term, not help it, but they're buying it, but it's trendy. And again, athletes will sometimes back it and say, well, it improves this and improves that. No, it actually doesn't. They're actually wrong. The athletes have bought into bullshit also, just like Irving has bought into this bullshit about the flat earth. It's no different. It's actually no different. They're both just as ludicrous. How about things like trying to put athletes on ketogenic diets? Absurd. Now, because an athlete in a certain endeavor can get away with a ketogenic diet, doesn't mean that it's anywhere near ideal for that athlete. And that's the difference. A lot of athletes have tried them, and they've been okay on it, but people aren't understanding that they're being successful at it because they maybe do a sports endeavor to where they can run on fat as a fuel source, not just glucose if they have to, such as something more endurance-oriented. Basketball player is a perfect example, because a bunch of basketball players have been put on ketogenic diets by a couple dietitians. But it's generally found that most elite athletes perform better on higher carbohydrates. Yet they do these diets, and because they still perform okay, because it hasn't interfered with their ability to compete, it's being seen as different. And it's making some of those dietitians stand out. But the reality is, it probably is very far from ideal for athletes to do this. Now, that doesn't mean that fat can't be a fuel source for athletes. And that's what all the experts who are talking about higher fat for endurance athletes out there is being touted as, oh, they must be low carb approach, talking about low carbs. But that's not always the case. A lot of these dietitians and sports dietitians who are discussing this are talking about putting athletes on high fat diets, because it allows them to eat a lower volume of food and have less food in their stomach, but still have a viable fuel source. Because some endurance athletes, when they reach a certain threshold, having more fat in their diet gives them more endurance in the competitive environment or the training environment where they're having to push themselves to the extreme in an endurance event with a strong endurance component, a strong conditioning component. And so you're dealing with something a little different there. You're dealing with something to where that fat gives them an edge after X number of hours of continual activity. But that doesn't mean that they needed to eat low carbs. It just meant that they needed to add in more fats for a longer sustained energy, because it allows them to consume more calories, have more calories in their GI tract with it doing less work. So that for someone who needs to burn through 2,500 calories during some event of additional food beyond their regular metabolic rate, they're not running around with a really full GI tract. They have this high energy dense food in there. But then people are taking that to mean, oh, well then a ketogenic diet. But that's not even what the top scientists are promoting there. And that's a big, big difference, is that ultra-high-fat diets for endurance athletes in a competitive environment is different than putting them on a straight ketogenic diet. There's no benefits to the ketogenic diet for them. There are just benefits to getting more fat in their diet if they need to have a certain amount of caloric burn over the course of hours versus how much volume you want in their gut at the time. That could affect performance. But it doesn't mean they're not carb loading on top of it. So you've got to watch this stuff. When it comes to a lot of athletes talking about scientific things, they're oftentimes not experts on science, and that includes them not being experts on either exercise science or nutritional science either. And oftentimes they will spout things off because maybe they had a coach or a trainer do it, or they picked it up on their own. And the reality is most of the top experts in those fields are even saying, no, this isn't right. You were just so gifted and so talented and worked so hard that it didn't create enough of a disadvantage for you to not still be a champion. It doesn't mean that it helped you. In fact, it could have hurt you, but it just didn't hurt you enough due to your work and your talent for it to have impacted you enough to lose. And therein lies the difference. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.